What if I told you that there's an island on the Hudson River where the fate of American independence hung in the balance? Constitution Island, sitting directly across from West Point, may not look like much today, but during the Revolutionary War, this small patch of land became a critical stronghold, a strategic linchpin, and at times, the setting for a military misadventure that feels more like historical sitcom than a tale of heroism. Yet, despite its rocky start, Constitution Island played a crucial role, not only in securing the Hudson, but also in inspiring a legacy of American literature. It went from a battlefield to a sanctuary for writers, proving that even the most unassuming places can leave an extraordinary mark on history. So, how did this island fortress evolve from a tactical necessity to a cultural landmark, and what secrets lie within its thick stone walls? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the history of Constitution Island. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Some of the names in this story will surprise you, since you know them from a perspective of success, and yet we will explore their greatest failure for Constitution. You see, many influential people in history started down the wrong path until someone helped them bring out what they had inside. With that in mind, today, thousands of people are still stuck in that same paradox. We have ambition and potential, but we don't know how to unlock it. Does that sound familiar? If you're feeling stuck in your job, uncertain about what's next, or just tired of trying to figure it all out on your own, this is for you. Today's sponsor, Strawberry.me, is a career coaching platform that matches you with a certified coach who's 100% focused on helping you move forward. It's not therapy, but it's like therapy for your career. Your coach helps you get clear on your goals, navigate challenges at work, and build a strategy to move from where you are to where you want to be. Whether you're going for a promotion, switching industries, or just trying to reignite your motivation, this is how you get out of neutral. I tried a session, and honestly, it was a great surprise. It wasn't judgmental. There were no empty phrases. It was just a real space to think. I was even able to organize a lot of ideas that I had about this channel's projects, figuring out what was holding me back, and most importantly, committing to what I wanted to change. No fluff, no hustle hype, just clarity, new momentum, and someone in my corner. So go to strawberry.me/itshistory and use code ITSHISTORY to claim your $50 credit, or scan the QR code on screen and take the short quiz to get matched with a certified coach. Because no one rewrites their future by waiting around. And sometimes the smartest move you can make is asking for the right kind of help. Big thanks to Strawberry.me for sponsoring this episode. But now, back to our story. To truly understand why Constitution Island became such a pivotal point in American history, we first need to grasp the importance of the Hudson River itself. This 315-mile waterway, stretching from the Adirondacks to New York Harbor, was more than just a natural boundary. It was a vital artery for commerce, transportation, and most crucially during the Revolutionary War, military strategy. You see, whoever controlled the Hudson held the power to split American colonies in half, making it a prize target for both British and American forces. First explored in detail by Henry Hudson in 1609, the Hudson River was a rich source of resources and navigation for European settlers in what is now New York, of course. Hudson initially navigated nearly half of the river for the Dutch East India Company. However, over time, his efforts were transferred to the British, as the Dutch mission in North America became less important to the company than the spice trade. By 1664, the Dutch settlers and militiamen were far outnumbered by the English fleet seeking to dislodge them from the region. Following the Treaty of Breda in 1667, New York became an English colony, and the settlement quickly grew. These English colonists easily understood the necessity of the Hudson River for exploration and defense. So forts were built across the span of the river, including West Point, Fort Montgomery, Clinton, and, of course, the subject of the video, Constitution Island, formerly known as Martellera's Rock. Before the American Revolution, this rocky outcrop was uninhabited despite its proximity to West Point. Anyhow, the Second Continental Congress had approved the construction of these forts. In keeping the Hudson, they could prevent naval superiority by the British, as enemy troops would have no way of cutting the colonies in half using the river. And so it was This rock right next to West Point was chosen as being a key obstruction of any naval traffic. With that in mind, commissioners from both the Continental and New York Congresses were sent to begin the construction of a fort and steel chains across this section of the river to hold off a potential British invasion. In the process, they renamed the rock Fort Constitution. As European settlers established themselves along the Hudson, the region's military value became evident. The river not only facilitated trade and settlement, but also created a natural highway that could either connect or divide the colonies. It was this dual potential, as both a lifeline and a threat, that led the Continental Congress to establish a chain of forts along the river. Hence, it wouldn't take long for Fort Constitution to rise. When building began in September of 1775, under the command of engineer Bernard Romans, he was given control of 2 companies of the Connecticut militia as a workforce and outlined his plans. The first design was simple, with basic gun positions, blockhouses for defense, and barrack buildings. The initial design was quite inadequate, with gun embankments constructed using chopped logs and wood. Since construction lacked security, they couldn't even procure sufficiently high-quality wood, and in the end, they were compelled to redesign the embankments altogether. And it didn't help matters that the man in charge would often disagree with the Continental Congress commissioners simply out of pride. In fact, at a certain point, things got so tense that they elected to stop speaking directly and began exchanging letters through a courier. The power imbalance between them and Romans was frequently used as an excuse for their lack in progress and the difficulties in sourcing materials, urging the military to come to reason on matters such as the design of the guns and blockhouse. But he was stubborn to a fault. For example, the blockhouse, as they argued and eventually demonstrated, was unable to fire downriver, rendering its purpose null and void. After polite appeals provided ineffective, the commissioners requested a personal meeting with him, with the commissioner later recounting, quote, "It is evident that he was not the best choice as an engineer for this important fortification, as it goes to show, further, that during the birth of our nation, we had to do things in a rather hit or miss manner. Ultimately, it seemed that Roman's apparent goal was to become a colonel in the Continental Army to enhance his resources for the fortification product before any significant construction had even been achieved." Then, shortly after the construction began in September, the name Fort Constitution was given to the island. Originally, the term had a patriotic meaning, referring to the colony's constitutional rights granted and protected by the British Constitution. As plans developed, the fort was designed to house up to 1,000 men from nearby counties, along with cannons shipped in from Kingsbridge in Pennsylvania. Even this was a hindrance because the current barracks only had room for 200 men. This was only enough for the laborers already there. The commissioners further informed the Congress that any men who came to the fort while it was under construction might as well just serve as laborers. And on top of that obvious problem, the harsh winter was setting in, and the underprepared militiamen were more inclined to return to their farms rather than spend their time in a tent working on a fort that they didn't fully appreciate. Even so, midway through the winter, Romans sent a letter to the Congress complaining about the insufficiency of his authority and their funding, stating that he must have, quote, more funds for food so that he would have enough for his servants, elaborating that he had to have at least 6 servants. He was fired in January, citing his personality and insufficiencies as an engineer as the reason. From there, he joined the army as an artillery captain until being captured in 1778, at which point he was shipped back to England. From the very beginning, the construction of Fort Constitution was anything but smooth. Under the leadership of Bernard Roman, an engineer with big ideas but limited experience, the project quickly became a case study in miscommunication, mismanagement, and missed opportunities. This was an outright embarrassment. What should have been a fortress of defense turned into a fortress of frustration, with militiamen struggling to see the value in their leader, a leader that found himself at odds with nearly everyone around him. 2 colonels took command after Roman's dismissal, but the important one to remember was Colonel Nichol. By May, General George Washington was getting increasingly interested in the fort. It had just been visited by Benjamin Franklin, who apparently had a poor opinion of some of the officers. Now, we can speculate about the reason behind this based on his refusal to comply with the release orders and Washington's decision to personally inspect the fortification, though I think it makes most sense through the lens of a statement later made by General Grant, who noted, quote, "Our military history of the Revolutionary War contains several incidences in which there was refusal to turn over the command to a successor. General Washington was confronted from the beginning with this difficulty as well as many others." For context, Grant ultimately became the 18th president of the US and was a key general during the later American Civil War, though his memoirs convey a valuable insight into military history and leadership. In a letter to Washington, he describes Fort Constitution as built up with 4 lines of cannon batteries. The largest had 15 embrasures facing the river at a sharp angle, though Sterling said, quote, "These can only annoy a ship going past." Furthermore, he described the blockhouse as having 8 4-pounder cannons. He also described Roman's design as, quote, "a great expense and very little public advantage." The positions were poorly defended and scattered. Moreover, there was no suitable command location. Hence, his advice to Washington was that it would be a better use of resources to provide smaller numbers of guns on each of the forts under construction along the river. The concept was that these cannons would only be on one bank, forcing a British invasion to, quote, "run the gauntlet," as it were, by making them pass several forts rather than just one strong point. With that, work progressed in all areas despite insufficient resources, though a strong chain wasn't built for the fort and West Point until 1778. Meanwhile, Colonel Knox was beginning to write to the Continental Congress about the need of a proper military academy to replace the, quote, "popular idea of raising an army with only militia, elected officers, and insufficient ones at that." Both needs were validated on October the 6th, 1777, when British attacks took control of Fort Montgomery and Clinton, forcing the temporary evacuation of Fort Constitution until the American victory at Fort Saratoga. At this point, the need for a literal river chain became seriously evident. Hence, construction was ordered and work was carried out by the Sterling Iron Company. The project was overseen by a recent widow named Hannah Townsend, with casting carried out in Tuxedo Park and delivery made possible by a series of ox carts. The chain was fastened together on site, buoyed by large timbers and anchored in place at multiple points, forming a strong obstacle whether or not the Hudson was frozen over. From 1779 onward, the fortification at West Point and Constitution Island were rapidly expanded, often with General Washington present alongside his friend Benedict Arnold, who at that time also happened to be the namesake of another new fort. Though I should say, after his infamous act of treason, the fort was renamed in honor of General James Clinton. Anyhow, around this time, the historical records regarding the construction and development of Fort Constitution and what is now known as West Point became somewhat unclear for the remainder of the Revolutionary War. With Roman's departure, the leadership of Fort Constitution shifted, bringing a more disciplined approach to the construction effort. Under the direction of Colonel Nichol and General William Alexander, the focus moved from grandiose plans to practical solutions. This was a critical pivot, as the British threat along the Hudson River was only growing. The fort needed to become more than just an idea on paper. It had to be a reliable barrier to British ships and a real deterrent against invasion. Once the gunpowder smoke of the Revolutionary War cleared, Constitution Island transitioned from a military outpost to a private residence, marking the beginning of an unexpected chapter, as this island, once a bastion of American defense, would now become an unlikely hub for American literature, with the Warner family leaving a cultural legacy as enduring as the island's military past. The transformation really started following the treason of Benedict Arnold, when his subordinate failed to deliver Fort Constitution and West Point into British hands, ensuring the island's continued American control. By By the end of the war, in 1782, only 2 units of note remained at Fort Constitution. One comprised of soldiers recovering from wounds and camp disease, and the other was Washington's Lifeguard, a select group of 64 men tasked with escorting the remaining British soldiers as they withdrew from New York in 1783. Following the war, the island's military significance waned, to the point that it was sold off to Thomas Warner, a lawyer, chaplain, and professor of geography, history, and ethics at West Point Academy from 1828 to 1838. Warner, seeing the potential of the island, enlarged an existing farmhouse and settled there with his 2 daughters, Susan and Anna Warner. Tragically, after the death of his wife, Thomas Warner raised his daughters alone, balancing his duties at West Point with family life on the island. Susan and Anne were privately educated, inheriting their father's moralistic values and developing a deep connection with the Hudson River's natural beauty. In 1851, Susan Warner published The Wide Wide World, a novel that became America's first bestseller, selling over 1 million copies, though it was penned under a pseudonym. Her sister Anne followed suit, writing My Brother's Keeper, a work that became a pillar of 19th century American literature. Both sisters' writings, infused with strong moral lessons, resonated with readers nationwide and solidified their place in literary history. Their devotion to education and faith led the Warner sisters to become Bible class teachers for West Point cadets, a role they maintained until Susan's death in 1885, followed by Anne in 1915. Their influence on generations of cadets was so profound that, in a rare honor, they were buried on the grounds of West Point, becoming the first civilians to receive this recognition. To remember their families' contributions to the Academy and American literature, they were buried on the grounds by West Point cadets. Even as fortunes turned for the Warner family, their legacy endured. One of Anne's pallbearers, Colonel Champton Jones, wrote the following, quote, "Those of us who knew her well found her always cheery, always busy. Anne's work was a notable work that I am sure was fully appreciated by the cadets who came to the Academy from all classes of society and all parts of the country. The life of Anna Warner was one of service and enlightenment, and in that she found her happiness." Today, visitors can walk the same grounds where colonial soldiers once stood guard and explore the Warner House, which offers a window into the past. From the remnants of old batteries to replicas of the Great Chain, the island provides a tangible link in both military history and literary heritage, inviting us to reflect on the many layers of history that coexist in a small but significant island. Fort Constitution was effectively a historical landmark long ago, but it became official in 1909 when the land was rezoned away from the Academy and placed under the administration of the West Point Museum. In memory of the Warner family, educational programs are also open during the island's tour season. In the end, Constitution Island might not boast that tropical allure of a paradise island, but its rocky shores hold stories of war and peace, struggle and inspiration, serving as a reminder that even the smallest island can shape the course of a nation. We'll leave it there for today, but if you enjoyed this episode and want to support our work, please consider joining our Patreon community. Your support helps bring more history to life, and you'll get access to behind-the-scenes content and a chance to suggest future episodes. You can join our community by scanning this QR code right here or clicking the link in the description. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.